Adhyatma Yoga by Shree SachchidaanandEndra Saraswatee Swamiji, Hare Narsipura, Karnataka. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Shri Ganeshaya Namaha. Dr. Krishnamurti Shastri, Dambe, Punacha, Karnataka. So already we have seen 2 points in that Adhyatma Yoga. Today, third point. The science of which the subject matter is the investigation of the real nature of the self is called as Adhyatma Shastra or Adhyatma, meaning the science which authoritatively and predominantly deals with the nature of the self is called as Adhyatma. So the research or the science that deals with the nature of the self, that is called Adhyatma. Next, fourth point. From this standpoint, anatomy and physiology are the earliest or the first group of sciences involved in starting the inquiry about the body, which is identified by all creatures as I am. Body is identified by all the creatures as I am. I am, that means the body only. All are feeling that, identifying. After these, the sciences about the various organs of speech and the sense organs are the second group. Thereafter, psychology, the science which investigates the various functions of the mind and their consequences, etc., is utilized. This is the third group. So also the intellect, buddhi or vijnana, and its aspects like momentary functioning, etc., are investigated in Buddhism. This is the fourth group. At last, not least, the Upanishads determine the real nature of the self, which transcends the I sense or the ego on the firm ground of universal or institutional experience, and by means of investigating it with a comprehensive vision of life. Here, the investigations about the self culminate in the final institution, and there will be no residue of the duality, such as the investigator, the investigated, and the investigation. Pramatra, Prameya, and Pramana. Fifth point. So, the teachings of the Upanishads about the true nature of the self is the only science of Adhyatma in the real sense, and not the other four groups mentioned above. Hence, that is, four groups means the anatomy, physiology, and the science behind organs of speech and sense organs. That is the second group. Thereafter, psychology, investigation of the mind and their consciousnesses. And the fourth is intellect. And that is buddhi. So, the teachings of the Upanishads about the true nature of the self is the only science or Adhyatma in the real sense, and not the other four groups mentioned above. Hence, Adhyatma means the science which investigates predominantly and authoritatively the true nature of the self. That is Adhyatma. Next, sixth point. In some places in the Upanishads, the process of meditation is prescribed for the benefit of the students who are incapable of cognizing the true nature of their own self. In these contexts also, some types of meditations related to the corporeal plane are prescribed by the scriptures. Sakara Rupa. For example, mind is certainly infinite, and the Vishwe Devas kind of deities are infinite. Through this meditation, one wins an infinite world. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. The mind is Brahman, Chandogya Upanishad, etc. Like this, the outer things also are prescribed to be meditated upon, and those things are related to the divine plane or Brahman, or the material divine plane or material plane. For example, the instruction is the sun is Brahman, air is certainly the place of merger, the vital force is certainly the place of merger, like that. Chandogya Upanishad. To distinguish the meditations on things of the divine plane and to lay stress on the things related to the corporeal plane, the Shruti starts to say that then is the instruction through analogy in the context of the individual self. This known fact that the mind seems to go to it Brahman, and the fact that it Brahman is repeatedly remembered through the mind, as also thought that the mind has with regard to Brahman. Kena Upanishad. Here the mantra states now the instructions about the meditation of Adhyatma to distinguish from the things of the material and the divine planes. The scripture uses the expression now the meditation upon Adhyatma, meaning the meditation on the things like mind, etc., with the feeling of relationship of Brahman or the real nature of the self. Hence, it is to be determined that either in the case of cognition of the real nature of the self or in the case of meditations, the inner entities which are related to the corporeal plane are called as Adhyatmika Prapancha. But when we refer predominantly to the science of Adhyatma or Adhyatma, then it denotes invariably the science which determines the true nature of the self. Hence, the word Adhyatma denotes the science regarding the self. AdhyAtma, Atma means self. Regarding the self, AdhyAtma. This is the sixth point. Next, seventh point. The word Adhyatma is used usually to mean spiritual. This word denotes the soul, which is the spirit or which lives in the body and after death departs from the body. The science which deals with this soul or spirit is called as the spiritual science or Adhyatma Shastra. But here also the source of all kinds of spirits or energies is the true nature of the self, who is beyond the ego or I sense, aham bhava, ahamkara. So the real spiritual science means investigating the real nature of the self alone. This ultimate truth is revealed in the Upanishads only, and there is no other science except this Upanishadic literature which reveals the true nature of the self, as it is on the firm ground of universal acceptance of experience, that is, intuition, and the comprehensive scrutiny of life. Next, eighth point. Hence, the spiritual science or the Adhyatma Shastra is a peculiar science which is very subjective and reaches the very core of life. The system of subjective teachings is available mainly in the 10 principal Upanishads and in Sri Shankara's Prasthanatraya Bhashyas. Before concluding this subject, we will give an excerpt from the Sutra Bhashya. Question, opponent. It is not proved that the self is known from the Upanishads alone, in as much as it is contained in the idea of I. Answer, Vedantin. Not so. For this has been refuted by saying that the self is the witness of that idea. Leaving aside the erroneous knowledge of the self as the agent of actions as contained in the idea of I, the real self, who is the witness of idea of I, which exists in all creatures, who is without any difference of degrees and who is one unchanging, eternal, and all-pervasive consciousness, such a self is not known as the self or of all by anyone in the section of the Vedas dealing with virtuous deeds or in the scriptures of the logicians. Hence, this self cannot be denied by anyone, nor can it be taken as forming a part of any injunction. And because it is the self of all, it is beyond all rejection and acceptance. This is the eighth point. Ninth point. The results of meditations like a transcendental meditation of Mahesh Yogi or the occult practices of Raja Yoga etc. And all such practices which accrue in due course, like miracles of Shakti Patha, transferring power from one person to another person, etc., are called as spiritual benefits. To some extent, these are very useful in our life and are very attractive also. But from the standpoint of real science of Adhyatma, these are non-eternal things. These are not. These are all material things, or mundane things, not eternal. The general rule is that which is done and achieved is non-eternal. That which is done and achieved is non-eternal. So, when the aspirant wants the eternal truth, which is beyond the triple concepts of time, then invariably he has to surrender himself to the teachings of the Upanishads regarding the true nature of the self, who is the innermost being or the very core of life. So, it is our real Swarup. It is our actual form, is the self or the Brahman. So, just realizing, by realizing this only, we will be getting salvation or moksha. So, that which is done or which can be achieved from outside is not eternal, it is not moksha. Because whenever one can be achieved, it can be lost also anytime. That's why just realization of our real nature of self, that is the final eternal moksha. So this is ninth point. I think from the 10th point onwards we will see in the next session. Thank you one and all.